Hi, everybody. I'm Becky Morgan from Stetson Law School, and I want to welcome you to the last in our series of webinars on fighting financial exploitation against Florida's elders, sponsored by the Office of the Florida Attorney General, Ashley Moody. I'm very grateful to General Moody that she entrusted us to provide you with this series of educational webinars, and so I want to tell you about what we're doing today. This one is a really exciting one. So what we're doing here is follow the money with Maggie Dunn. And in a little bit, I'm going to tell you more about her qualifications, and we're so fortunate that she's willing to be here with us today to tell you and share her expertise on how you can follow the money to make your case. So just as a reminder here, we have some tech support options for you. We're hopeful that you don't have problems, but in the event you do, here's the information that you need to know in terms of who to contact. And our stellar IT staff are available and standing ready, but hopefully there will be no calls. All right, now you should have gotten, if you're watching this, you got an email from us. Because this is our last one, we're still going to maintain our mailing list. We may have more webinars in the future, so if you wanted to be added to the mailing list, just send us an email and we'll get you added to the list. Also, after the webinar, the Office of Professional Education will be sending out a link for you to give us some feedback and to give you information if you're looking for Florida Bar CLE credit. This webinar will be recorded, and then it will be put up on our website along with the prior webinars. The only webinar that you cannot watch after the fact was the October webinar with Teepa Snow. That one was not recorded. The rest of them are. They're already up there. We'll be adding this one to our library for you. Now, if you have questions for the speaker, make sure that you use the chat function on your computer when you see the webinar screen. Type in your question. Hopefully, we're going to start questions at about 15 minutes before the end of the hour, but if Maggie still has a lot of material to go through, it may well be that we hold the questions and she answers those subsequently. And so today, actually, rather than Karen coming in, I'm just going to be the moderator for this program today. And so we'll get through this and you'll really learn a ton of information. So here on the screen is a little bit about Maggie Dunn. She graduated from Pace University with a degree in accounting, and she is a certified fraud examiner as well as a certified law enforcement officer. She got some experience at New York State with the AG's office. She was an auditor investigator for Medicaid fraud before she moved down here to Florida. She's done Medicaid fraud investigations for us as well, but she's with the Miami-Dade Police Department as a financial investigator. She's currently detailed to Homeland Security, and you can see her portfolio of investigations that she's responsible for, which includes terrorism, organized crime, economic crimes, public corruption, as well as homicide and the medical unit for those public corruption types of cases. So she's basically law enforcement, fraud. She talks about investigative techniques, financial analysis, how you present the evidence and make it understandable, how we deal with the timelines for the assets, how you gain and gather the evidence. Think about all those records that are available out there. All incredibly important information that you need when you're looking at a financial exploitation case. And isn't it terrific to have somebody speaking to us today who actually understands that stuff and can tell us how to do it? So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Maggie Dunn.
Thank you, Becky, for that nice introduction, and I'm very happy to be here today. In some ways, financial abuse is very similar to other forms of elder abuse, that it can be devastating to the victim and is frequently traced to family members, trusted friends, and caregivers. 85% of elder financial abuse is committed by family members, but unlike physical abuse and neglect, financial abuse is more likely to occur with the acknowledgement and consent of the elder person and can be more difficult to detect and establish. As a result, financial abuse or exploitation requires a distinct analytical perspective and response. So that's why I'm here. Financial exploitation is the second most common form of elder abuse after emotional abuse, which is an estimated prevalence rate of 5% each year. So as we live longer, we're going to be having more of the elder financial abuse and exploitation. On the screen are Florida's Department of Children and Families definitions of abuse and exploitation. So I would like to say that this is my favorite topic because I get to talk about myself. But these days, most police departments, and if you're going to file criminal charges against an abuser, you're going to need a police department to file these charges. And most PDs don't have forensic accountants or financial investigators. So we rely a lot on investigators themselves. And it all depends on whether or not they have an acuity to look for detail, like limited details. So as Rebecca said, I have an extensive career investigating white-collar crimes, specifically Medicaid and Medicare fraud. I have never done an investigation of elder abuse, but a white-collar crime is a white-collar crime. You follow the money. You do a review of the bank records and court documents, and you follow the money. But this also requires a lot of time and attention to detail. In 2019, over 5.8 million Americans of all ages are living with Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, 47% of those Alzheimer's patients are mistreated by their caregivers. Some common examples of financial elder exploitation is extortion, and that is when there's threat to harm if you don't turn over the funds, and most times those kind of cases go unreported for fear that their caregiver will not provide them with the care unless they do what they're told. There's unexplained disappearance of funds or valuables, such as jewelry. They might not even know their jewelry's been stolen. Inappropriate use of phone, food, or other resources. A lot of these elders don't have a lot of money, and they require that for their own personal resources. If you have a family member living in the house, those monies could be used on themselves. Transfers of real property, and we'll get into detail about that. That is key. Transfers of other assets, vehicles, firearms, etc. Caregivers' refusal to use elder funds to meet their essential needs or services. Misuse of the elder's home, where the elder could be living in squalor and the family member could be living in the nice, big, tidy room. There's also identity theft. Scams right now are very common. Social Security imposter scam, IRS calling. Now, most of us know that the IRS will not be calling you. Social Security will not be calling you. You'll be getting letters. So an elder person may think that that really is IRS or Social Security. The lottery scam. Oh, yay, you won the lottery. Just send us a fee for shipping, taxes, etc. Romance scams are very common for elderly that are on the web. So just if you are a family member, just keep an eye on what mom or dad are doing on the internet. I know my own stepfather was scammed. Somebody calling him saying that my brother was put in jail, he needs to bail him out, and he had to go to the home, he had to go get $5,000 of cash out of the bank, go to the Home Depot, and purchase credit cards. Well, that seems unlikely if somebody's in jail, that's what the jail would require. But unfortunately, these kind of scams happen all the time. The issues that we run into with the elder abuse or exploitation, the biggest issue is that victims don't report, mainly because they're embarrassed. Or they may not even know that they're being scammed because their mental capacity has diminished. You also have complex family dynamics. People have a durable power of attorney. Is that their, did they request a durable power of attorney? We'd like to see those documents if we can, to see who's named as the power of attorney for the older adult. And if you are at the house and the elder is talking to you about this, please take copies or pictures of any documents that the elder brings to your attention. A lot of times, elders have multiple banks, investment accounts, credit unions, and they're in multiple institutions. So the elder person could be constantly moving money from one account to another account. So we can't just add up all the withdrawals and say, oh, that's the amount that was stolen. We have to account for all the transfers between the accounts. Double counting any of the withdrawals could affect our charges. Under or over amount could make the difference between the degree of the felony charged. So that's another reason for having a financial position. You follow the money, you gather all the records, and account for all the monies going in and out of the accounts. Another issue is the period of abuse is unknown or suspect to have occurred over many years. If the victim doesn't know how long the exploitation is occurring, where do you start looking? If you can identify when the abuser entered the picture, I recommend request the financial records 6 months prior to the criminal activity. This 6 months prior to the criminal activity will show us a pattern of the victim's spending before the abuser entered the picture and will identify deviations after the time the abuser has entered the victim's life. If the abuse has gone on for a long amount of time, I would suggest to go back 2 years from the time the investigation was opened and to try to determine a pattern to see if there's been any changes. If the forensic analysis identifies fraud or significant pattern by the abuser, then I would go back even further, depending on the statute of limitations. Another issue we come across is the victim and the abuser share resources. The victim may put a family member on the bank account. The victim may add the family member living at the house onto the house. They may share the cars with them. They're no longer driving anymore. Now, if the abuser begins to sell out some of those resources, then did the abuser do that on behest of the victim? Is the proceeds from those sales going for the care of the victim, or can you trace those monies into the bank account of the abuser? Victim spending patterns are sometimes are unknown or not easily identified by the initial review of the bank records, and that's because they're sharing the bank records or they're multiple subjects. So we need to find out who's paying the bills, what other expenses are coming out of those accounts, and who are those assets benefiting. So for all these reasons, financial exploitation cases require a significant amount of time and attention to detail to properly investigate. And again, most PDs don't have the proper resources, like a police financial investigator or a forensic accountant. And there are very few detectives trained in that area. I tell everybody that's going to be investigating a financial crime to read every piece of paper. It's very important because someone that's trained for fine attention to detail will see something that maybe a detective or investigator doesn't see. And again, if you're working in a team when you have a prosecutor, an investigator, and a financial accountant, everybody comes with a different perspective, and everybody sees the piece of paper and sees something different. So again, it's quite beneficial to have a financial investigator on your team. So I regularly get calls from PDs asking for our forensic resources, and I wish I could help everybody out there, but I'm willing to train anybody that wants help. So what are some of our signs of financial abuse? A review of the financial records will add credence to these signs of financial exploitation. So the documents that we're going to start looking at are trusts, wills, deeds, and see what when the changes occurred. Is the victim aware of the changes? Is there a power of attorney? Is the victim aware of the power of attorney? You could check all those signatures. You check signatures prior to documents when the victim maybe did not have mental incapacity to find out what her signature looked like. You compare that to all these documents now, the deeds, the trusts, the wills. Let's look at large purchases if they're for the abuser's benefit. If you go to the house and you look at the victim's room, it's cluttered and filled with just paperwork. But then you go to the caregiver's living space and it's beautifully furnished, brand new clothes, brand new sheets, high-def TV. Find out what the source of those monies were for those large purchases. Inappropriate financial reimbursement for services to the older adult victim. So I had a situation where the victim said, yes, I do give my niece $100 a week, or $100 here and there. But the financial analysis determined that that niece received $50,000 in a year time period. So if you present that to the victim, that may be a difference of whether or not that victim may want to file charges or not. As I was saying before, when the caregiver is living off the adult, the older adult, let's check, see if that older adult is unemployed. In Florida, we have access to the Department of Equal Economic Opportunity, where we could get a wage and earnings to find out if that adult had a job, and then when they moved in with the caregiver, they're suddenly unemployed. So maybe that would be a clue that they're living off the older adult. We're going to look at all the bank account applications to see if there are new names on the bank accounts, see when that change took place, and we're going to review the signatures again from the original application for the bank accounts to the current changes to see if there's a change in the victim's signatures. Unauthorized withdrawals, unpaid bills of the victim, sudden transfer of assets, unlicensed caregivers in the house are often signs of financial elder abuse. So what records are available to us? Ta-da! The bank records. That's often where we go first. You can certainly tell a lot about a person by looking at the bank records. Where does the money come from, and where does the money go? Detectives and investigators, agents, always ask, hey, can you get me those financial records? Sure, but we need a subpoena. You always need a subpoena for somebody's bank records, unless, of course, you have other sources like the victim or FinCEN, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. Sorry, this is kind of tiny, but these are my tools, and it's certainly not the whole list of tools, but it's my main go-tos. So the first way I try to identify financial records is the victim. If the victim can even provide one bank statement, one investment statement, that would be helpful. But what if the victim's unable to help? They may not know where they bank at this point. They don't know how much money they have. So if we do have something from the victim, that's where we start. And we subpoena those records immediately, because it does take a long time to do a financial investigation. A lot of times in elder exploitation, the victim may be mentally incapacitated with Alzheimer's, dementia. However, if the victim can provide one statement, that may lead to more records, and we'll go into that later when we're talking about the review of the documents. If the victim has a tax return, the Schedule B lists out banks' investment accounts that the victim files interest. So that's another place to start where we can subpoena those bank records. If the victim has an accountant and they agree for you to contact the accountant, another place to identify where they do their banking. The next on my list is FinCEN. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a bureau of the United States Department of the Treasury that collects and analyzes information about financial transactions in order to combat domestic and international money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. Just like the elder abuse, it's a financial crime. In Florida, FDLE has the portal for any LEO law enforcement requests. And I'll talk more about that when we get through the slides into FinCEN. Check system is another place to identify financial records. So again, it requires a subpoena, and I'll have the information on a subsequent slide. One of the first things I do when I get a financial case, I subpoena credit reports from Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. You may not be able to identify an actual bank account, but you'll be able to identify any credit cards the victim has or the possible abuser if they've already been identified. It'll tell you what banks they use for their credit cards. Additionally, it will tell you what bank they have for their mortgage, which is another way so we can start subpoenaing bank records. Cell phone records. I subpoena the call logs to include payment information. Again, another way to identify where the victim's bank records could be. Or sometimes elder individuals will call their banks to see how much money's in their bank. Some of them are very concerned about where their money is. So one of the calls on the cell phone records will be the bank, and that's another way to identify the bank account. Utility records subpoena to FP&L. Find out, FP&L will provide who's paying those bills. Another way to identify the bank records. In Florida, we have a system called DAVID for law enforcement. And this will provide us with vehicles attached to the victim and or the abuser. And if we go to the vehicle sheet in DAVID, once we find the victim's name, it may have a second person registered to that vehicle. That could also be a clue to if there is an abuser, whether or not the victim, the elder person, knows that that person is on the vehicle, if that person still has a car. Also, when I look at the vehicles, when you click on the vehicle section, you go down to see who's insured on that vehicle. Sometimes that will identify another abuser or the abuser. Legal documents, not so much for financial identification, but for signatures to add to your timeline. Power of attorney documents, mortgages. You look at all the signatures on this to create a before or after when the elder was incapacitated. Check the notary on all those documents. Is it a friend of the abuser? And you want to check the power of attorneys, see if there's specific powers for banking, real estate. You have to be very specific on the power of attorneys. You can also go to the county clerk's records to identify assets owned by the victim. And it'll also tell you when those assets are possibly transferred, when and to who. Mortgages, especially reverse mortgages, where this way you can identify the bank of the reverse mortgage and you can subpoena those records. Medical records. That you'll have to get from the victim or the Adult Protective Services. They're very useful to start out. They have access to Social Security information where you can get direct deposit information to identify their banks. There's also mail cover. We'll cover that on the next slide. I went over the Florida Department of Equal Opportunity, the wage and earnings on the abuser. The abuser owns a business. You could contact Department of Revenue to find out where they bank to see if there have been movement of money from the victim to the abuser. There's also dumpster dives. They're not as important anymore since a lot of people have shredders and a lot of people do direct deposit. I recommend if you come in contact with an elder person, try to convince them to do a direct deposit of their Social Security or their pensions. It's a much safer way to do banking right now. I see JLR is finding this webinar very helpful. Maybe I'm talking too fast because he can't write fast enough. And the PowerPoint will be available at a later date, correct? If anybody needs. We'll make sure you get it, JLR. Okay. So as I said, one of the tools we can use to identify banks is a mail cover. Mail cover requests for all locations must be sent to the following address in Chicago. An electronic version of the request form is available upon request by contacting the mail cover unit with the United States Post Office at 312-669-5673. Oops, There you go. And it is only for law enforcement contact requests. So what this will give you is it's a list of all first-party mail going to that location. So if anybody there is having bank statements still sent to the house, then you'll have another way to identify a bank account. So as I said, Adult Protective Services are very good. If they have an open case on your subject, they will be able to help you to identify some of the bank information for the elder victim. There is a website there with all the contact information for every region in Florida. I'm not going to go into each one of them. As I said, the PowerPoint will be available to anyone, so you'll be able to get that information. And if there was questions, I need to take a drink of water just so I can continue talking. Okay. So, after we followed some of those investigative steps, we now have identified bank accounts. And in order to get a bank account, we need to subpoena. This is just basic jargon for a subpoena. I have this slide because that first line is an ISP Search. I use this website practically every day. When I want to identify any bank, internet provider, it gives me it's a great resource to identify where I send the subpoena, if they accept service by fax, email, they have to have personal service, or by mail. So it has Leo contacts usually for every single one of those providers. When I'm subpoenaing records, I add including but not limited to the account that I've identified. Some people don't believe that that's what you should do because then it limits you to only that record. But I find since the day of electronics, banks are much better than they used to be. So you please provide any and all records for the account information relating or referring to the following business, individual, and or any other account for which the below individuals are authorized signers for the period, blah, blah, blah. And you want that information in electronic format. And that's a laundry list. So I ask for everything: savings, checking, certificates of deposit, loans and lines of credit, safe deposit box, very important, money orders, bank drafts, wire transfers. And then I want copies of all the supporting document: bank checks, cashier's checks, money orders, all the deposits with the supporting checks for the deposits. So I want to include all of that, any 1099s issued, statement of accounts. You ask for everything, and hopefully you get it all. So in a lot of my financial cases, there could be multiple subpoenas, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of. So I just create a subpoena log. I include the date of return, the issue date, the subpoena number, the account name, the subpoenaed entity, the account number that I'm requesting, and a type of record. It could be bank records, it could be phone tolls, it's just a log for me to keep track of all the subpoenas. I find it very helpful. In the status section, it may be where I am in the review process, whether I've entered those records into my software, whether I'm waiting for supporting documents to be entered, or whether or not the analysis is complete. Or I may put the source of where the information came from. Like, for instance, it came from a review of such and such bank, or it came from a piece of paper at the house. This is easy for me to identify where I'm getting this information that I need to get subpoenaed. In the comments section, I may put a brief summary of what was returned from the subpoena, so I don't have to go back into the case file to find the report of what I received. Just a quick brief. I received phone tolls for this phone number from this time period to this time period. What I found was my victim's son is also included on those records. It may seem like overkill, but if you have voluminous subpoenas, you'd be surprised how quickly this list grows and how efficient this could be to keep track of your records. And I have to say, a lot of my prosecutors enjoy that also. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts. Everybody wants to see the bank records, but what I find really important is the supporting documentation. I tell all new police financial investigators, I tell all detectives to read every piece of paper. I know I said it before, but it's extremely important because you would be surprised what you could find on an opening application. You may find a phone number you didn't know about. You may find another account listed as a referral for this new bank account. So when I talk about opening documents, you're going to have the victim's signature. Very important. The date it was opened, or if any owners were added, or when they were added. This will be important when you're reviewing the supporting documentation like the canceled checks and withdrawal slips to identify who has control over that account. Deposit items, very important to identify assets. Where is the money coming from? Look at the notes on the checks of the deposited check. This can be a clue to an asset or another bank account that the victim may have. They may include transfers from accounts you didn't know about or accounts that are being liquidated. You may see proceeds from a reverse mortgage or a sale of real estate property or real property. You may see insurance checks with a notation with the purpose on the check, policies that were cashed out, and claims for missing valuables. A jewelry reimbursement from an insurance company. The victim didn't even know that that jewelry was stolen. So reviewing the deposit items is very important. Withdrawal slips. The date of the withdrawal and the signature of the person making the withdrawal. I find the easiest way to withdraw money from an account is an ATM withdrawal. So when you're reviewing the opening documents, one of the items that should be on there are who has access to an ATM card. Are there multiple ATM cards? Is the victim one of those people that has access to their own ATMs? Or are the user has access to the ATMs? And again, most banks only keep records of ATM withdrawals for a short amount of time. So if you've identified multiple ATM withdrawals, number one, you know your elder abuse doesn't have access to a car. So is it likely that your elder abuse is going to the ATM machine every day? Is it likely that the elder is going to an ATM 5 towns over or another state? These are things that you'll want to identify for the ATM withdrawals. And again, banks may keep footage for a short amount of time if you want to subpoena those ATM withdrawal, the ATM machine footage. Let's see. So is your victim mobile that person would be able to get access to an ATM? Another way to withdraw money from the bank is by cash or cashier's check. Both will have a signature on the withdrawal slip or on the cashier's check. If it's a cashier's check, there'll be an endorsement on the cashier's check. Hopefully you deposit it into a bank account, or even just cash, you'll still have a signature for a person. And a lot of times the banks now are requiring a driver's license to cash those items, which is very helpful for us identifying who's getting that money. In my experience, oftentimes copies of the cashier's checks do not always come with the original subpoena. So that would just require a follow-up call to the bank contact, and you can easily remedy that. But again, it's more time for your investigation. The signature on the cashier's check or the withdrawal slips will identify who ultimately was receiving those funds, the victim or the abuser. Cancel checks. You have the front of the check and the back of the check. On the front of the check, you'll see the signature of the person writing the check. You go back to your signature card. Is that the same signature? Do you think that's your victim writing out these checks, or do you think that's the abuser attempting to mimic the person's handwriting? And they may also put a notation on the front of the check. That may become important to see what the use of that canceled check is. And then you also want to look at the back of the check to identify who's endorsing the check. The signature can also identify the bank and possibly the account where the money was deposited or cashed at a certain bank. And again, banks often require ID for cashed checks. Checks written to individuals require follow-up. We look for the notation on the check. Does it say renovation of the bathroom, renovation of some part of the house? Is this individual a contractor, or is it just for an individual or for a business? And again, there's many ways to follow up on if it's an individual by identifying them in David, or maybe you even ask the victim, are they familiar with this person? And this will be key if they're talking about renovations to the home. When your detective or investigator goes into the house, they're taking pictures of every room in the house. Does it look like they had a bathroom renovated? Does it look like the kitchen has been renovated? That will be more towards where your victim's money is going. But make sure you take pictures of the entire house when your detective or yourself goes out to look at the house, when you interview the victim. Someone is asking, the print is somewhat blurry. Can we print a copy of this information via email? I'm guessing yes. You can take a screenshot while it's still up. Transfer items, same as the canceled checks and the withdrawal information. Was this money used to be transferred to another victim account, or was the money transferred to an abuser account? Transfer items, usually they typically identify the bank and the bank account and the person that money's being transferred. And there we will need further subpoenas to get that bank information. It's a very lengthy process to review and subpoena additional bank information. It's time-consuming, you need attention to detail, and you need patience. Okay. So Stetson says they have the PowerPoint and they're going to send it out to anyone that requests the information. So this is what I was talking about. When you're looking at all your documents, you have your canceled checks, you have power of attorney, you have original bank document applications. There's plenty of places to look for signatures. And you could clearly see there's a difference of signatures here and here. So, from the savings account early in the month in June. And I'll be talking about Edith Collins on the next slide. But I just wanted to show you the different signatures from the different documents, from the different time frames. So when we're looking, let's talk about Edith Collins. Edith lived alone until after her husband died. A couple of months ago, her son James moves in to quote unquote, quote, help out Edith. Edith called the local police department at one time when her bank statements didn't look right. The detective made observations during the interview. She saw Edith's messy bedroom, and it was all cluttered. Meanwhile, Edith's son James' bedroom is fully renovated the basement, with a new TV, new furniture, new bedding, etc. So the interview took place while James was out walking Edith's dog, Fluffy. So she's got an emotional commitment to Fluffy, which maybe these threats of James, you have to do what I say or I'm going to hurt Fluffy, because she loves Fluffy. I mean, that could be just an idea. We don't know yet. But she talks about her dead husband, the nest egg he left her, and the treasured vehicle in the garage that Herbert loved. The detective notices Alzheimer's medicine on the table in Edith's name. He takes pictures of everything noted above. Edith provided the detective with her latest bank statement, so we were able to subpoena the bank statements quickly. So from this review of the bank statement, it's hard to see the bank statement, but what we see is really only 2 deposits from her Social Security, her direct deposit, and she has a deposit from her pension fund. Those are the only 2 sources of income. And then we have some withdrawals. There was an ATM withdrawal, there's the cable company, AT&T, a bill pay, the power company, typical for someone living in the house. So what I'm going to do with these bank statements, I'm going to summarize the bank records to identify where the money came from and where the money went. So for me personally, Miami-Dade has contracted with a company called AIT. It's run out of Virginia, and it's a financial information software where I'm able to scan in my bank statements in a PDF form, and it converts it to an Excel spreadsheet. Ta-da! Time saving. Talk about time saving. It has been a lifesaver for myself and the other police financial investigators that I work with. If you don't have that financial software, then it's a tedious job to input the bank statements. Some don't have a lot of information in them, so it might be a quick job, but most times I find there's a lot of information that needs to be put in. So once the statements are scanned, you reconcile your bank records to your analysis to ensure that the beginning and ending monthly balances are correct. So you know you've gotten everything in there. I'm running out of time. So once I've got all my information in correctly and my bank statement analysis, the ending total matches the last bank statement ending balance I have. I summarize where the money came from in the deposits, and I summarize where the money went in the withdrawals. So this is basically what your summary deposits will look like. You'll know that she had a little cash deposit, Social Security deposits, and her pension deposits. So that's what the spreadsheet looks like. If you click on the little 2 in the left-hand corner, it brings it down to the little spreadsheet in the bottom where you just have the totals for what came in. Social Security, $3,300, the pension, $2,200, and your grand total of $6,750. So what I like to do is summarize that in a chart. And this was from January to June of 2017. Yes, the bank account is the name of Edith and James Collins. We've already checked our application, and he was recently added onto the account. So this is what the expenditures look like: utilities, American Express, Ed's TV and appliances. We didn't see anything new in Edith's room, so we're gonna subpoena all those documents. But let's go one step further and add July. So what do we see in July? There's a mortgage company check for $100,000. When we subpoenaed that mortgage company, it came out to be a reverse mortgage. So again, I did the same thing with this deposits and the withdrawals, and I came out with a little summary. And this is our flow chart of the money coming in and the money going out. So based on this new flow chart, we added the mortgage company to subpoena. Oh, I'm trying to read some of the information on the screen of people asking questions. So here we go again. Now we see more money going out to a furniture company, an auto repair. We found out that Edith doesn't even drive anymore, so she doesn't own an auto. But James may own the auto that drives Edith around. That's a possibility. Is those monies still being used for Edith's benefit? They are. So it may not be nefarious. But this is a kind of flow chart I would use. People seem to be, you can easily follow the money when you're looking at a screen in a simple chart. So when we follow that $100,000, there it identified that the money went to a bank account in the name of James Collins at Hoover Bank. So we subpoenaed Hoover Bank in the name of James Collins for that checking account that we identified. We identified the signature card. Only James is on the signature card. And he uses a P.O. box for this bank statement. Maybe he doesn't want these bank statements going to the house where Edith may be able to find them. So when we have the Hoover amount, Hoover bank account that we've subpoenaed, we can now add on the mortgage. And we have identified more information to use subpoenas issued. So we can subpoena more information. Look at $20,000 going to PayPal. I'm not thinking Edith is using her PayPal account. And the jewelry, we didn't find any expensive jewelry in Edith's room, and we didn't find any photography equipment. But maybe James is planning on giving Edith a gift. We're not sure about that yet, but we'll get all this money here. We do see some withdrawals in July, again, when after the money came in from the reverse mortgage. And we're going to find out where that cash went. It's a tedious process to keep following with the subpoenas. So if you have cash withdrawals over $10,000, we'll be able to check with FinCEN to see if FinCEN has information regarding any of those cash activity. FinCEN has several different forms that I find very informative. They have suspicious activity reports. These are filed typically by bank tellers or money laundering units within a bank. If there is a suspicious activity report, you can get all of that bank information without a subpoena. You just, typically on a suspicious activity report from the bank, it identifies a person doing that report from the bank and a phone number. You just email that person or phone call to that person. They'll send you all those documentation that they used during filing of that report. Currency transaction report is filed by any bank when there was a cash transaction of over $10,000, whether it be a deposit or a withdrawal. Very informative. A CMIR, when somebody gets money orders. So they will be also filed. A FEBAR, any foreign banks where money has gone to. And a Form 8300, reports of cash payments over $10,000. So if you go to a car dealership and you pay for your vehicle in cash, that car dealership is required to file a Form 8300. So let's check and see if FinCEN had any reporting for these withdrawals in July and August and September. We saw the $21,000 coming out of the Hoover Bank. Yes, there is. Hoover Bank filed a CTR in July 28th, and there was a withdrawal of $21,000 by James Collins. Funny, on that same day, Jay's Boat Sales filed a Form 8300 for the purchase of a boat with cash for $19,950. So now we can add a few more things onto our flow chart, which was created in PowerPoint. And we're just keeping building onto our chart that we had prior. And we've now added Jay's Boat Sales. Okay, when we first talked to Edith, she talked about her husband Henry leaving her with a little nest egg. Here's Edith's little nest egg in her savings account. When we did a little chart to identify over a time period from June, when James comes into the picture, to September, we see a decline, a huge decline from $250,000 to now it's just about under $100,000. So we're going to do analysis of that savings account. Very similar to what we did with the checking account, to identify where that money went. Well, Edith wrote checks off of that WOW account. It was not your typical savings with withdrawals, but it had checks. So we see a lot of these checks going out, little small amounts, $95 here, $300, $250, but it all goes to a Don Parker. We ask Edith who Don is. Don's her boyfriend. Yes, Don, over that time period, got $53,000 for, we're thinking is a romance scam. So again, we have multiple abusers. We're not even sure if James even knows about this Don Parker, but our investigation will identify more information. Sorry, I'm going a little fast. I'm coming to the end of my time, and I need a little drink. So after we've gathered all this information from several different bank accounts, and we're following the money, we may want to do a little timeline. And this one, to me, is a little busy. The one thing I say about timelines is keep it simple. So this one, yes, it has all the proper information, dates. They talk about which accounts, withdrawing money, the home equity loan. It has all the pertinent information. But then when I take away all those, the extraneous lines, and I keep it simple, it's a little easier to follow with the eye. And remember, we're talking to juries. We want them to see that $100,000 came from the mortgage company to Edith. On the same day, there's a check from Edith to Jim on 7/14. We want to show that on 7/18, there was a withdrawal from Edith's savings to the WOW account. On the same day, Jim opened, like this several days after he gets the check, several days later, he opens the Hoover account. 10 days after that, he withdraws cash from the Hoover account, and he buys the boat on the same day. And then you'll see several other cash withdrawals, 8/31, 9/10, 9/17. We were wondering, there was huge withdrawals that didn't show up when we searched FinCEN. Why is that? Because they were all under the $10,000 reporting mark. Now, if you had a good teller at the bank, they may have noticed that there were several large withdrawals from this account in a short amount of time. They may have written a SAR, which we would have been able to get information to. But that's more money going to James. Now, when we interview James, we can certainly ask him about this money to identify if he was paying for services for his mother. More than likely, he wasn't paying for services for his mother. Or if he was using an unlicensed caregiver where he could have gotten at a cheaper rate because the person was not licensed, he may have been paying cash to that person, which again would be another person involved in our scam. So generally, I would never make an opinion. Most definitely, I would never make an opinion to what's happened here. But I will write a little report, a narrative, a brief narrative, saying that I have reviewed this bank account number in the name of this person for this period. The total deposits were this, and significant items noted were this, which would have been the reverse mortgage, or an insurance proceeds in this amount. Those would be information that we would have been followed up on. And I would do the same in another paragraph for the withdrawals. Significant withdrawals were this, when subpoenaed the information, the monies went here for this person. So, but again, I will never say, I think James stole money from Edith, because my review and narrative of the bank accounts will lead you to the same conclusion that I drew, that James is abusing or exploiting his mother. So with this, I don't know if I've answered all the questions on the screen, but if anybody needs, we will be able to provide these. I don't know if they have a copy of the webinar, if you can get that, but for sure you'll be able to get the PowerPoint. You're asking about the Examine the Bank Statement, CFIS, or BankScan. Yes, there are several companies out there that do what CFIS does, where you can import those bank statements into, it's a PDF conversion to Excel. I happen to find CFIS is very flexible. They do have good reporting. I don't necessarily input all the deposits and the checks in CFIS, because I do so many bank account analysis. I have data entry clerks that will assist me in inputting the supporting documentation. But whatever helps you to get those bank statements into an Excel spreadsheet, I find is very it's time saving and is very much useful to your investigation and analysis. So does anybody else have any questions? I can look on the screen to see if anybody's chatting up there. Otherwise, I do believe that my time is up. I'll just go back to the screen with the one timeline and going to the next timeline to show the difference. And again, it's all personal preference, whatever you like to do. Just keep it simple for a jury. I am finished. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. So the webinar replay will be on the Stetson Law YouTube channel on Thursday. If anybody has personal questions, not personal questions, any business questions or any questions about my webinar, you can contact me at mdunn@mdpd.com. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I want to express our thanks to Maggie Dunn for a wonderful presentation. It really is terrific that she flew up from Miami today to share her expertise with us, and round of applause virtually for Maggie. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the last in our series of webinars. I am talking with Karen in the statewide prosecutor's office, as well as Nick Cox, the statewide prosecutor, about whether there is a need for more webinars. So we'd really like to hear from you about whether you thought this series was valuable, and if you would like to see us in 2020 do some additional webinars for you. Not only that, if you think that's a good idea, tell us the topics you'd like to see us cover. I want to make sure to thank our Office of Professional Education for their support in doing these webinars, and more particularly Stan Arthur and all the other folks in Media Services for putting these webinars together for us and producing them. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a good rest of the year. Thank you so very much.